Hey golfers, and welcome back to the Second Swing YouTube channel. It's another live at lunch on what's actually turning out here to be a beautiful Thursday. This is going to be fun. We have Tyler Fitzel joining us, Master Club Fitter at our Minnetonka location. And this is kind of born out of a few different ideas. We actually sent out a survey or a post for feedback within the YouTube community. And a lot of people mentioned old versus new club comparisons. And so we're starting today with TaylorMade, specifically going through the last, well, not every driver from the last 20 years, but kind of highlighting 2005, 2015, and then now 2025 with these three drivers here. So what we have is a TaylorMade R7 460. We have the TaylorMade M1, which was a 2015 release, and then we have, of course, a TaylorMade Qi35. I guess, Tyler, just want to tee you up to kind of just give us your thoughts on TaylorMade's drivers over the years and the way they've been kind of at the front of a lot of new technologies. You know, movable weight technology. We've talked about, you know, the carbon crown perhaps on the M1. What has been your feedback and your experience fitting TaylorMade over the years?
Yeah, one of the things that I look for is adjustability now that we have it, right? So from a fitting sense, if someone's doing something with a club, we can maybe adjust that club to get a better result out of it. Maybe we can move the weight, we can move the shaft. So TaylorMade, when they first came out with the R7 Quad, was the kind of the engineers, their pinnacle of driver technology. They had the ability to move 4 different weights. They had different weights. You can move it around. That changes center of gravity. And center of gravity on a hit with gear effect is a huge influence on what we see from the results. They've continued with it. We see movable weight technology as a key centerpiece. I don't know of any major golf company in the market that doesn't have movable weight technology. We've seen individual weights, so they're in a spot. We've seen tracks and slides, and every company is now on board with that. The second thing that kind of came in, and it was just a little after that R7 460, was the ability to change up the shaft or the head angle. So you have that sleeve that allows for some rotation. And that, again, is not necessarily on that R7 460, but it's right after that as you start getting into a couple of the different models in TaylorMade. And so we've seen movable weight, then we saw adjustable shaft. Now, one of the things you have in your hand there, and we'll talk a little bit about the M1 from 2015. And I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that's the first carbon crown that TaylorMade went with. What that did was it saved up a lot of weight on the top and allowed them to move more weight down below. So from that perspective, it kind of changes the game in terms of what you get to do with the center of gravity. And that's one of the things that we see as a counterpiece or as a centerpiece to almost all drivers on the market today.
Yeah, and now of course, you know, you have Qi35, which is all carbon. So you go from, you know, the M1 here, which maybe introduced carbon on the crown, and starting to see what was possible with saving weight through that. And then now, of course, everything, you know, on the TaylorMade Qi35, you got the carbon face, you got the carbon crown, you got everything made out of carbon, essentially. So what we're going to do is just test these head to head. You know, we've got as close as we can. Obviously, there's a, you know, when you start getting 20 years old, we have a ton of inventory at Second Swing, but you start to get, you can't get too picky when it comes to the specs of things and trying to match things up. So
a little bit,
what we're going to do is try to play these as close as we can to about 8.5 degrees, because that's what we've got here with the R7 460. So we're going to be close. We've got both the 9.5 M1 lofted down. We've got the Qi35 9-degree lofted down. So we'll see what we can do there in terms of making this even. Again, the shafts are going to be different. This is a bonded hosel with the R7 460, so you can't really turn that. But I know we got some comments. People are already excited about what we're going to see here. And I will, for the record, note, I've already warmed up with several swings here. I might even get tired as we go here because I've been warming up so much. But I think we're going to start with R7, so let's get started.
Yep, I've got it in here.
You got me on a more friendly fairway today. I like that.
Well, to start, we can always switch over and take a look at a tight fairway and see what happens.
Okay. So yeah, the R7 here is equipped. This is an Aldila Voodoo.
Yeah.
You familiar with? I haven't seen one of these in a while.
Yeah. Specifically, one of the chief engineers on that is now at Ping. John. He runs the shaft department at Ping. But
sure.
That was a very, very popular shaft. It's a very stiff shaft. It has some stoutness to it. That's a 7. Even though it's a stiff, it's a pretty stiff shaft. So it'll be able to kind of keep up with where you're at 110 mile an hour club speed. It won some majors. That was a major winner.
Oh, yeah.
That type of shaft.
This is kind of right when I was getting into golf at 12 years old. 10, 11, 12 years old was the R7 family. I used all the commercials on Golf Channel and on when you're watching on TV on the weekends. This is kind of a brand, so to speak, that's nostalgic for me as just being a little kid, giddy about getting into the game. So 20 years ago. All right. We're going to tee it high and let it fly today. Ooh, there's a good start.
So one of the things about the R7 as it came out too was that it was bonded. And in other words, it's like it didn't have a shaft that was adjustable. And that was one of the major changes in the game is we look at a lot of other companies kind of held themselves out when they finally got adjustability in the shaft as well, so you could really move the loft or the lie angles with it. That's really where the game changed. I think TaylorMade was a little bit more on the forefront of it. And we saw some of the other companies, you just talk about any of these companies for that matter, is they all stayed bonded a little bit longer. They're trying to figure out where they wanted to go with this technology. But now everyone's adjustable that way, and even some companies maybe a little bit more in terms of loft or lie angles.
We had a comment here. Someone made note that they just walked 9 with a 2008 TaylorMade burner, so they're pretty excited about this. I love that because that's not too far after this this R7 family. There we go.
One of the things that we don't see, and this is kind of the behind the scenes technology, one of the things that we don't see is the back of the face. And this is where a lot of technology kind of gets hidden. So we're always talking about center of gravity, and center of gravity is very huge in terms of launch, spin, as well as direction. But one of the things we don't see is the back. And there's kind of an ellipse or a circle, and that it gets a little thicker or thinner. And that technology has been around for quite a while, and it's really, if you want to see the technology at its finest in terms of marketing, Callaway really markets that. They're really talking about how they want to thicken or thin different parts or shapes of the back.
Mizuno's done that with their irons now. Most recently, they actually mentioned the ellipse shape. The contour ellipse face there. So, but yeah, you're right. That's something that I feel like with drivers in general, that wasn't really a message, so to speak, that was out there for driver performance until recently. Yeah,
it's been in there, and that was another one. That's one of the TaylorMade key pieces to their technology even back then, as they started to introduce this, was to have that face is thicker and thinner in the back to produce more or less ball speeds and spins in terms of hit location. So that's a huge piece of the puzzle.
I gotta say, those last two felt pretty darn good. And in terms of shape, this thing is, today the drivers are a lot more, the footprints are a lot larger, even though the volume might be the same. This is a 460cc head, but today they're able to kind of draw some of that weight farther back behind the club head, whereas this one is, it kind of looks like, what would be a very low spin or very compact one today. See, that's where, look at how much that spin went up when I maybe hit that one towards maybe slightly below the center.
What'd you want?
That one was went up to 3,400 on the spin there, which I feel like you would see today with a modern driver when we get to Qi35. That's going to be a lot better. There's another one again, same thing. Starting to pick up the club speed a little bit. I went after that one, but it doesn't give me any distance when I mishit it a little bit and the spin goes up over 3,000 like that.
Yeah, even from that perspective, as you look at, that's a 288. It's not the worst in the world for that, but there's 290, 304, 308, 283. I look at it in a couple of different things. The first is, what about club speed and smash factor, right? So
Yeah.
moving it, you've got 147, 47, 49, 45, and 43. You might not be hitting these off center a lot, but that's where technology is probably going to kick in.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the centered shot that gets that ball speed moving a little bit faster.
Yep. That's where I get a 149 smash factor and
yeah.
hit it.
Yep. And so right now that's a little bit on the lower side. You know, this could be the length, it could be the loft. It's like, I'm looking at this going, I think we should get more forgiving, but what does that mean? Well, it means faster ball speeds, and then when we do get faster ball speeds, we're probably going to see some more distance to it.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is not direction. If you close the face, that ball's going left for you.
Right,
If you
which is
open
what
the
I
face-
did on that first swing, right?
Right. You can see even from face angle is a little
Yep.
closed. You know, 8 degrees open, 5 degrees open, 4 degrees open, and that last one was just 1 degree open. So I think that's enough for this, right? As an example. I do like the numbers. The numbers aren't bad. One of the things I was talking about earlier was the idea. This might not be a bad driver for you. Say for instance, we have someone that's coming in with a 2008 burner.
Yeah.
If you're optimized, you might get a different driver in your hand, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a better driver in your hand.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that needs to be considered too. Is players that are playing well with a driver that's as old as this, right? We're talking about 2005 here. You know, someone mentioned 2008 burner that you're talking about. There are, you know, when you hit it the center of the face with something like this versus Qi35, we're going to see probably comparable numbers there. But what gets me here is I've mishit slightly. I actually swung fastest, right, with that shot, I guess, number 35. That shows you how much I was warming up beforehand. I had 30 shots before we started, but 35 there. It was actually one of my shortest shots of the group because I mishit it, and the forgiveness was not there. My smash went down to 143, and then I ended up hitting it over 3,000 spin, which killed me distance-wise, despite swinging the club 3 miles an hour faster than the rest of the shots. So, yeah. But the R7, I mean, I think it's still, if you're a good player, you're used to the look, you're used to the feel, like it's still something you can definitely play today. And actually, this one in particular is $109.99 on secondswing.com. So
there you go. With some adjustable weight.
Right.
It's got a nice,
not even a fitting either.
If
That's more of
right. If I don't need to, even if I don't need to change that necessarily for its shaft, it's like that's got something very stable, very stout. And it's an 8.5.
Yep.
That was.
Yeah.
It's like back then. Here's another thing to look at. This is interesting too. The launch and the spin are actually a little higher than I would think for an 8.5.
Yeah, I mean, again, I hit up on the ball a ton. That's part of it. And then people might, I don't know if they're seeing this tee, but this is teed up pretty high. So, which is how I tee the ball up. But that is, again, and then I know John in the chat is telling me I'm making excuses.
Yep.
It's, you know, that could be. That's part of the game here.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
So my excuse this time is that going to be this grip is larger than the last one. So it already feels weird. So that's my excuse for hitting these ones poor. But no, this is the technically 2015 M1. I think it was released in the fall of 2015. So I think most people associate it with 2016. But yeah, the M1, this is where you see on the sole those weight tracks that you mentioned.
Yeah.
We've got a sliding track for fade and draw, sliding track for moving some weight forward or back, which TaylorMade did this for a few drivers there for a while, talking about M1, M3, M5. There was, you had some adjustable weighting possibilities there. You
know, even if you look at, well, we'll talk a little bit about that in the Qi35, but the technology in the Qi10, the low spin option had a sliding weight. And what they tried to do is they tried to cover that up so that the track was kind of covered up, because it does become an air resistance and a friction type thing. So that's one of the things. Also, in terms of that, the track, you have to stabilize or solidify that track, so there's actually more metal involved, there's more weight involved. That's another piece of this puzzle, is like, what have we done since? Moving that weight now becomes maybe a weight port or a hole that you can change things out of. So
which was actually kind of how the R7 was. So there's So you used to have the ports that you could swap it in and out.
Yep.
Then they went to the sliding deal. But what I would imagine is over the years, TaylorMade, Callaway, all these manufacturers realized that's actually tough on the aerodynamics.
Yeah.
These tracks here. So then the result now, as you mentioned with the QI10, is they're trying to cover that up, or if there is a sliding weight, they're trying to make it as kind of clean or as smooth as possible on the sole to resist that drag.
Yeah, and not only that too, but when you start talking about the structure itself, is like we've got more carbon fiber, so now we're going to get into the M1. This is where I think we've got a large introduction to the carbon fiber. That's going to be a huge piece of this, is like I'm trying to save weight, and a big old track on there, I have to have weight in the metal. So that's one of the reasons why even the newest, and we'll get to that with QI35, but it's a lot more carbon based. So let's see if this does.
Yeah, and again, we talked about, we had a pretty nice shaft of that R7, so that brought that price over $100. This one's only $135.99 on secondswing.com. So
yeah,
at M1. So you're going, it's a pretty good price actually for a driver that has, I think we're going to see something, still pretty good performance here. Very different to look at that white stripe on the leading edge of this M1. Ooh, see right off the bat I hit that off the toe. Look at that spin rate on that one. Barely crept it over 1,000, but it actually was pretty it's a pretty solid result, all things considered.
Yeah, we'll get a few on there and we'll see what happens. I do think that is one of the major advancements in technology right now is spin.
Yeah.
We've got drivers that are basically going as long and straight as they can be, but that also comes into the technologies. If you want something that, maybe you need something that spins a little bit more, so.
Wow. That was, that's crazy how low spin those last two were. And they were, not that they were both, that one was probably a little high on the face. Yeah. But to see the spin change so much from what I would expect, right? I mean, my good swings, the way I swing right now, and the stuff I'm expecting around 2,000, maybe a little under. So to see the ball kind of knuckle the way it is on those two, I mean, it works out because the ball's flying straight, but it's one of those where if you're not optimized and you get spin this low, it can be a real problem.
Yep.
It's the same golf shot.
Another dart. I think the TrackMan's stuck on that shot right there.
But you might be right.
No, that was just absolutely, literally the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean.
Good.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean.
See, I mean, now I actually am wondering if there's a TrackMan glitch right now, because, I mean, I felt the same, but.
No, I don't think it's a glitch. I just think you found your new driver.
Oh, yeah. That's about as straight as I can hit a golf shot right there.
Yeah.
Well, we're putting a pretty high bar here for QI35 to live up to, because now I might have to invite you to invite you to open up the PGA.
Yep, let's open up the PGA and see where you are here. Now, from that perspective, these are all in a really good spot. But let's hit another one there too. Let's see, now that we've got the visual, let's see if you can do it again.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can't get some launch here a little bit on this thing. I feel like I've hit all these kind of low. Yeah, got that one near 100 feet. I am.
Yeah.
I will say I noticed too, someone made a comment about the sound of the R7.
Yeah.
This is definitely more of a thud, a lot more of a thud.
Yeah.
A lot quieter.
Well, let's take a broad picture here real quick as you look at those 5 shots versus the technology in the R7 460. Right away, we're looking at very, very consistent numbers. That's a total distance as we look at it there.
Yeah.
We're also looking at that as a carry distance. That's also very consistent. If we're looking at it from this perspective here, you can see just based on that how straight these are. It's not that the 460 was, egregious, but you're looking at the average launch angle was 11.2 to 11.7.
Oh, that's actually pretty close. Here's the big difference.
Yeah, is spin.
So is spin, and I do want to. I mean, I know the dispersion looks pretty good. And I'm getting away with it in this scenario here, but that spin being that low is not good. For, you know, and again, I ended up hitting the last two pretty solid, but I never got the ball over 2,000 spin.
Right.
And that was with me kind of trying to those last couple make sure I got some spin. So to me, there's a pretty clear big difference in the spin rates or the spin capabilities of the R7 and the M1.
Yeah. Well, and it's what I mentioned. Like, a lot of the times when we start looking at technology, if you're coming out of, let's go back to the early 1990s, where there were still wooden woods in play. At that point, as we got into the 90s and we started to see metal woods and we started to see, you know, bigger, we started to see movable weight, things like that, you also are looking at curvature on that face. And a lot of curvature means, generally speaking, more spin. And so that was one of the things that a lot of companies had to kind of toy around with. Someone might come in with a 7.5 degree driver from the late 90s and early 2000s, and they get the right launch and spin. That driver today might be 10.5. And it's just a matter of the amount of launch and spin that we're creating with it. Again, we get to change center of gravity, we get to change our miss hits, the gear effect. But that's one of the things that I've seen. It's like, I hit the ball pretty well and pretty far, pretty straight for a long period of time with a 9 degree, 8.5 degree type driver.
Yeah.
Now, it's 10.5 because the ball doesn't spin.
Right. I mean, that's all the manufacturers are trying to get this high launch, low spin combination.
Yep.
You know, but depending on how you swing the club, that high launch isn't uniform across the board.
Right.
You know, they might be telling you this is a high launch, low spin driver, but for some players just swing down with the ball and are naturally lower launching players.
Right.
And so, you know, the 10 degree club or 9 degree club might not work for that player.
And
with
you
that
know,
low
to
launch
that,
and
if we
low
really
spin.
talk about fine tuning, we talk about like lead tape. That's what Aaron Roth always says. It's not a golf club unless it's got lead tape on it.
Right.
And so back then, you might have even done that. And we do see a little bit of that with drivers today. But now that I can change the weights in and out, I can really fine tune a lot of that. Back in the days, like they'll put maybe in a metal head, they've got a weight port so they can put some hot melt. They can maybe change some of those things. Now we can just change that right then and there. It's real quick. We can do it on, you know, in the fitting bay, get our results and go.
Yeah. But yeah, I think I'm really curious now as we get to the Qi35. We should probably mention on the shaft on this guy too. We had Aldila Rogue Silver. This is a 110 MSI. Extra stiff here. So that, you know, could have also been contributing to some of the spin difference. Obviously, it was a pretty big spin difference that we did see there.
No, I don't think so. I think, personally, I think that if you've got the almost same exact launch number, then the spin had to come from somewhere else.
Okay. Oh, that's true.
And I think it was more the technology.
And hit location probably too.
Yeah, it could be. And I don't know that we have hit location on here.
We could certainly find out. But yeah, that was definitely a part of it. See, I knew I was hitting a couple towards the toe and up high in the face there. So.
Okay, which is a little lower.
Yeah,
so,
which I had a couple also high toe as well too.
Yeah.
With the R7, and I still never, you know.
Probably
I
this one.
I don't know, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah, could be up there.
Because that's the one without spin.
Right.
This 2400's not bad. That's
towards
just
the
out
toe a little bit.
Yep. So that says a lot. That says why you
having that actually on there is kind of a nice indicator as well.
And going back to smash factor, so at 1.46, you did. So here's the beauty. You hit it 320 as an average, and you were pretty straight with that.
Yeah.
And you didn't necessarily get the ball to do everything it possibly could have.
Right.
So
well, let's try the. That's kind of fun to think about.
Yeah. So a little optimization. Let's try the Qi35. This is just the standard model of that. Again, this time we're going with the 60 extra stiff. This is just the new model, the dark weave that they have, or dark wave, Kylie, Mitsubishi.
So again, we understand this is not a perfect scientific head-to-head test. Different shafts. Obviously, the hosels and the stated lofts being slightly different also makes it not perfect. We're trying to get it as close to 8.5, but so there's all those elements playing into it that aren't perfect, but nonetheless still fun to see them all kind of head-to-head here. But Qi35 also, I mean, talk about three different drivers, by the way, in terms of looks.
Yeah.
R7, it's got a compact shape, just a shiny, glossy black crown. You bring in the M1, you got the carbon fiber on the backside, and there's the thick white stripe.
Yes.
Very, you know, kind of that abstract look to it.
Yep.
And then now you got a Qi35, which has that chromium sort of gray silver look.
Yeah.
Three completely different looks, and that's one thing TaylorMade's done over the years. They really haven't been shy to change that up. Whereas someone like a Titleist, they're trying to keep that crown as similar as they can with that kind of
Well, there's
classic
a reason
look.
for it. Let's go back to the mid-90s, and Tiger Woods steps onto the scene. And I know he was probably playing a Cobra King something at the time. But when he went to Titleist and started playing Titleist clubs, it was a very pear-shaped. When he went to Nike, all of his clubs were very pear-shaped. When he went to TaylorMade, TaylorMade's became very pear-shaped. I think part of that is going to be where you look at the companies themselves. The players wanted to have a certain look to it, and that was Tiger's look. And that really influenced a lot of what happened at Titleist. They've continued with it. It happened at Nike. They're gone. And it's happening at TaylorMade again. That's one of the things that I look at now. Tiger's going to get his own look no matter what we want to talk about.
Right.
But TaylorMade has to make that look for him, and then they have to be able to sell that look. So that's one of the reasons I think TaylorMade has slowly started to come back to a very pear-shaped
that's
design. Yeah.
for sure. I also want to give a shout out to this last commenter who said he's been coming back from a 20-year break from golf, still rocking a Titleist, 905?
Yep.
And MP33 blades. Those are a couple classic models of golf equipment from the last few decades.
You know, I'll go into that a little bit more for that comment too. You know, time for an upgrade. The upgrade, if you hit it solid, the upgrade is just kind of getting new, fresh grooves. It also might be finding a little bit more ball speed on mishits. It could be a shaft update, and that's one of the things that we try to look at: the club, the swing, and the ball. So with the club, I talk a lot about length and strength, and that goes for every club in the bag. Now, it's not necessarily strength in terms of a putter, but a putter does have some launch numbers, so we look at that too.
That was an interesting first shot because I feel like we can look at it after, but I feel like that was a heel shot, and it still performed pretty solid for me. Ooh, I could feel in my swing I turned that one over a little bit. Oh, we got that. Okay.
Well, you asked for your hit location.
Well, yeah, I did. If that turns over, that's going to be really good, yeah.
Yeah. It was a little toey. But one of the things about that too is, again, we're just trying to find something, you know, in common amongst them. One of the questions, this is a really good question too, is, you know, TaylorMade's driver faces look so different from some of the others. Driver face technology is where a lot of the technology is happening right now. It's not necessarily happening in the shape. It's happening with material and then application. Mm-hmm. TaylorMade has gone all in on carbon face drivers. Now, it's not going to happen. They're not going to go to a carbon faced fairway or hybrid. The reason is that you're going to get too much dirt on that face. You're going to have impact with something other than the golf ball. But we're going to see this with their drivers. We probably won't see it with a mini driver because, again, I don't want to get a mini driver and I have to hit it off the turf and then I get dirt in between it.
Right.
That's going to cause some issues with that carbon fiber that they use. But you're absolutely right. The faces are different.
Yeah.
And the materials they're using, TaylorMade's gone carbon fiber. They've gone through a couple of iterations of this. So you got Stealth, mm-hmm. you got Stealth 2, then they went Qi10, and now we're on Qi35. One of the things that they found was how to apply that carbon face. It wasn't necessarily the thickness or the thinness. It was kind of the cover, what gets hit by the ball or the tee, because that tee has an impact on it. And then the second piece is how it's attached. The first generations of this was actually a very thin metal piece that the face would get attached to. And what was happening is the face would actually kind of pop off or crack or come off. And that's because the glue couldn't withstand the hit, the impact. They went to a softer glue, they welded it on a little differently, and they're much better in their technology today than they were when they started.
Yeah, much more durable.
That's
for
right.
sure.
And then when you start talking about the different titaniums, for example, Titleist kind of prides themselves on having this armor-plated titanium. That's the only one used in the golf industry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of the different technologies that we see are literally different materials. So
Right.
they're trying to get different materials up on the board. Yeah. Whether or not it works for you, whether or not that's something that clicks with you, personally, if I don't mind the look, I'll hit it. If I don't mind the feel, if I don't mind the performance, I'll play it.
Yeah.
So that's really where you have to come in and get fitted. It's like we talk about, maybe last year's driver is your driver.
Right.
You know, maybe a couple of generations ago is still better than the current one for you, but that's why I want to look at it for you.
Yeah, I mean, and to follow up there, someone asked about titanium drivers being phased out. No, but I think there's refined titanium materials that are being used.
Yeah.
Not just your standard stuff that what you would have seen on the driver face from many years ago. So.
Right. Consider it an alloy.
Yeah.
A lot of the times we're trying to get to an alloy. I know we're not talking about Titleist, but they've gone to a graphite alloy type on the top of theirs in the new GT lineup. And what that does is allow them to save weight. The same sort of thing we see at Ping's new G440. All of their driver models and all of their fairways and hybrids now have a carbon top. So it is the technology that they're looking at, trying to take some different materials, move that weight around.
Ooh, that one's going to go left. That was a bad swing.
Well, but even for that, like, just take that aside for a quick moment. And we look at the three of these.
Wow.
Did the launch change?
Not really.
Nope. Now, the spin went up. That's not the worst in the world there. We look at the carry distance, 71, 284, 284. But, you know, maybe the hit location on the Qi35 has something to do with it.
I will say, too, one thing that I was making note of off camera, before we went live, was it felt to me, just by looking at this, even with the adjustments made to the hosel, it just felt like the Qi35 sat closed.
Okay.
And it still does right now. And then it could just be, maybe it's, nowadays there's a little bit more draw bias, maybe subtly packed into the driver heads today versus years ago.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it sits a little closed to me, and to me, it feels like that could have been a part of the, maybe it's a subconscious issue I had with some of those swings there.
So one of the things that TaylorMade started doing, and many of the other companies do this as well, is on their models they have a different lie angle as a base lie angle. So for instance, TaylorMade, I know this happened years ago in the Stealth or the Stealth 2 lineup, the quote-unquote max forgiveness type driver had a very upright lie angle. And what that does is to kind of help rotate or keep that face closed or get closed a little bit faster. Because generally speaking, most right-handed golfers hit the ball to the right. Well then, in their standard model, it was a little bit flatter. And then in their tour models, they had it very flat. Because preference in most players that have a swing speed that's a little bit higher or play a model like that is not to have it look shut. You have a high swing speed, I wouldn't probably want it shut. I'd probably open that up.
Right.
So that's one of the, but again, that's the adjustability we have with all of the companies. So even if I took a max forgiveness, opened it all the way up, you still might not like the way it looks.
Right.
And so that's where we just have to play around with generally a tour version, some sort of a standard version, then some sort of a max forgiveness version. And that's where TaylorMade's got it. I mean, they've got all of those on the board too.
One thing I want you to pull up or isolate specifically the first swing with Qi35 and see the hit location. Okay, it felt definitely below the face, below the center, but to see that ball, for one, stay, very much in play. That's going to hit most fairways out there. Maybe not this one, but then the spin also didn't climb really much at all. It stayed under 2,500, despite being hit below the center, equator, so to speak, that I like to call it. I think that speaks to the forgiveness that you might see now, where if we go to some of those shots with the R7, I think there's a couple there that, I hit those top two there. The last ones I hit were slightly below, and we can see how much of a difference in performance there was, where that ball, was kind of high, weak fade.
Yep.
We saw the spin go up to 32 or 3,400 RPM.
Yep.
That, to me, is the big takeaway in 20 years of technology. You might not, and we've said this before, but you might not see a huge difference if you hit the exact center of the face with both these drivers. They're going to go a similar speed. You might see a little spin difference, but overall not a ton.
Yep.
But when you miss the center of the face, even a little bit like this, I'm not missing it by that much. If you can see a few millimeters, right?
Yeah.
It maintains its performance with the Qi35, and then with the R7, I ended up losing, call it 20 something yards, and I added a ton of spin with that one.
Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to kind of highlight to this was also looking at that smash factor.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about smash factor, it was the start of a conversation a very long time ago in terms of how fast the coefficient of restitution, that is the bounce effect that can come off of that face, that is really tightened down. Now, we saw this with TaylorMade. Last week at the PGA Championship, we had Rory and we had Scotty Scheffler with drivers they deemed to be unfit for play. There's a lot that goes into that, so I don't really want to try to unpack everything that goes in with that. But the reality is that this happens with every manufacturer, whether it's graphite or carbon face or titanium or the kinds of metals that they're using. The ball impacts that face, and that face is flexing. And that flex over time will get more flexible until it breaks. So it's almost like it'll get hotter and hotter and hotter.
More springy, basically.
Yes. And players will know this at that level because all of a sudden, a normal shot goes 20 yards farther, like, oh, wait a minute.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's flying. They've already got that on their radar. Companies are not trying to make, they're trying to make the hottest possible, but they also,
while still making it conforming.
You can't, if Scotty Scheffler was on, let's say, the 16th tee, and it was only a one-shot lead, and his driver breaks, he's going to figure out a way to come in. But the companies can't have something falter like that. And so this is where the equipment that the professionals or the tour level players are getting is slightly adjusted. It's maybe a little bit more durable. It's not quite as hot. So the stuff that we get on the market, like from retail perspective, might actually be a little bit hotter.
Right.
But it's going to be on that line.
Yeah.
And
there's a certain line or a certain
Yeah.
boundary that is set by the USGA.
Yep.
And our understanding, and this is maybe a little bit, the philosophy is maybe slightly different manufacturer to manufacturer, but they're trying to build it as close to that as they can. And sometimes they've even been building it past that line and then making the tweaks necessary to bring it back.
Yep.
To keep it conforming, keep it under that
well,
springy
you think about,
effect.
and TaylorMade is a good example of this. TaylorMade had, help me with the model, was it the M6? The M5 and the M6 where they put the screws in the face?
Yes, they were injecting like resin or something in there.
Yeah, so they're kind of the screw is there because they're injecting like, they have a little pad on the back or kind of like a little hole. They're injecting a liquid or some sort of a rubber compound that dampens the face to keep it from being too hot. Mm-hmm. Well, that's one way to do it, and that's what they did. They try to get it hotter than hot.
Which M6 is still being used as on tour. I know specifically Aaron Rye is still using an M6 driver, and it's that could be part of it. Is there's a feel out to that, but also a consistency on the speed that comes with that. So, but this has been, overall, this is, I think it's reflected in some things. I think I also am pretty impressed with how the M1 played, despite maybe the kind of variance in that spin rate. That is also something to note as well. Despite my very different swings across the board with Qi35, look how consistent the distance is all the way across. And also look at how the spin stayed consistent as well.
Yep.
So because of that, the distance, while again, I was missing, I had a couple go way left on me with Qi35, I didn't lose a ton of distance, whereas I think if there's one I missed left with the R7 there, that orange one, you can see how far that dropped in distance when I had that kind of low left, or that sort of, that hook shot there.
And that had no spin, and that spin creates lift, and lift creates
I maintained the spin with Qi35 when I had a similar swing there.
The other thing too is when we look at this from a broad perspective, right? These hash marks on either side here are 25 yards to the right or the left. We're looking at that saying, there's just a few shots on either side that got away from you.
Yeah.
For a generalization, a pretty generous fairway is going to be about 40 to 50 yards wide.
Yeah.
And you're pretty much in the fairway there.
Yeah.
We did see with that M1, you were in the absolute fairway, and then in both cases, they were very straight with it, but you're also really long with it too. This happens to be St. Andrews number 1 and 18. Right?
Yeah.
Here's the 1 tee box, and then here's the 18th green, and then I think when we start looking at it, remember people, there's ball speed, launch, spin, and direction. It's not just a ball speed thing for distance. It's not just a launch and spin thing. It is where is it going. So that's one of the factors that we try to look at with this too. What was it about that club?
Yeah.
And even for that, we needed a lot more spin. So what would we do to get more spin? It could be a shaft, could be a loft thing. That might just be loft.
Right. I mean, that's the
up.
thing about a fitting is there's all these other pieces we could touch on to, for example, that Qi35, I think as a fitter, there's probably a lot of reasons you like that, even maybe more than the M1 or very close, just because of the spin consistency, because there's more ball speed, because there's the distance consistency despite maybe some bad swings by me. So I also just want to go back to the chat here. We got a really good.
There's about 3 or 4 that we have to get to.
Yeah, we do. I will say this in the last few minutes here as we're kind of wrapping things up. I see someone asked about doing this again next week, which was the plan the whole time. We're going to keep doing this with different manufacturers. It sounds like Titleist is the front runner. If there's any anybody against that, any rebuttals to that, throw them in the chat right now. Otherwise, we're going to plan on Titleist doing the same thing next week with I'm thinking 906 or 907. And then to 915.
Yeah,
or
it would be
917.
because that would have come out in 15.
And then GT. So that'd be kind of the same thing. We'll see what kind of differences we get with Titleist.
Yeah. The other one is talking about metal fatigue being a true issue with the professionals. That can happen at an amateur side of this, but you are going to have to be hitting hundreds upon hundreds of golf balls. You're also going to have to be hitting it with some super duper ball speed, club speed. And for that matter, we do see this in the retail market. We do see failures.
Yeah.
We do see things that break. It's not a customer's fault.
No.
When the face might break, is like that's part of the modern day equipment, if you will. The other thing I would say about that too is you can get something to wear out a lot quicker depending on the kind of golf ball or the range ball that you're using. So for instance, if you're at a place where you get a softer golf ball to hit, you probably aren't going to have quite that impact, but you're gonna get that face isn't going to be as harsh.
Right.
Where you get to a place where you may be using a really super hard range ball or really, really super hard golf ball, it's like if you're putting hundreds of hits on that a day, or you've got a lot of club speed and ball speed, that is going to wear out. The question isn't when, the question isn't if it's going to happen. It's kind of when it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's part of it. And I know there's been, as we talked about with the carbon faces, there's been some things happen with TaylorMade drivers, but they're really good about replacing it and stuff like that.
Yeah, and even for that matter, it's like talk about what are the companies doing. Well, the companies from a durability perspective, I know this because I've seen it, and I was in the testing room at 2 of the different companies that we carry. The 200 to 220 mile an hour ball speed for upwards of 20,000 shots off the same spot, and doing that all across the face. When you've got 20,000 shots with more ball speed than anyone's going to produce, and you've got something that's holding up, those are the standards to which they're going at.
Right.
We don't hear about drivers breaking a whole lot or having to be replaced a whole lot on the PGA Tour, which means that standard is pretty high to that. So
yeah, there's been things will continue to evolve. Obviously, I'm curious about what's coming next. In the next 10 years, what's going to change? But we'll start to wrap there. I think we appreciate everybody joining. We had some really good feedback in the comments. Next week we're going to do Titleist. So if you have any suggestions on what drivers you want to see, again, we're trying to do kind of 2005-ish, 2015-ish, and then we'll have a GT as the newest model. But yeah, Tyler, thanks for joining today. This was really cool. We got to see some TrackMan numbers. We got to see some differences we expected, maybe some we didn't.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that's why use that second swing. There's so many used clubs to choose from. If you don't want something brand new for $600, you have options, and we're showing those here in these tests. So Tyler, thank you for joining. We'll see you next week on the channel. I'll let you sign off, Tyler.
Yeah. Keep your grooves clean and stay razor sharp.